Hi everyone, welcome to Sweaty Casuals, brought to you by the Snowflake Sanctuary Discord server. This is the podcast where we will talk to the A to Z of games we love to play, from the state of rank systems to our thoughts on the newest sensations and everything in between. My name is Nox, and along with my co-host Zach, we will be your guide as we traverse Eat Low Hell. A small reminder, we do swear, so viewer discretion is advised. Today, we are joined by the Paradox Muse, or Paradox.
Hi.
Paradox is an assistant director of esports at the collegiate level and has been within the video game community world for a long time. They are joining us today to discuss the seemingly forever ongoing debate between which platform is truly the best, PC or console. So kind of to kick off today's episode, we do little icebreakers. I wanted to ask everybody, what is their number one game on their their Steam wish list right now?
Gonna say you don't want to know what's on my Amazon wish list.
Yeah, right. On my Steam wish list?
On your
Yeah.
Steam wish
That's a
list.
good question. I don't actually know. I may have to boot up Steam to find out that question.
I didn't. I went and booted up my Steam, but I knew what it was. I just wanted to know if there was any other ones that were interesting.
So, like, do you know about Danny, who's like a pretty famous YouTuber? He's got like 2 million subs. He makes like dumb games. He made like Crab Game, and I'm trying to think of like other games.
I've heard of Crab Game.
Yeah, so it's like Squid Game, but like a really bad Muck. He's also made Muck. I don't know if you're familiar with.
I love Muck.
Okay, yeah. So it's the guy who made Muck. His like a game that he always says to go wish list is Carlton. So I know that's on my wish list. So I guess that would be it. But
Mine's Kerbal Space Program 2.
Is it out?
Oh, that's a good one.
And it's been out. It's in early access. I've been
Okay.
waiting. Because it's $50, and I really don't like spending full price on games, as terrible as that is. Especially games like that where I know I will play it enough to make the money back. But the number one thing for me with that one in particular is I want the multiplayer to be available. And that's pretty far down their roadmap, so I don't feel the need to go grab it because I still have Kerbal Space Program 1. If I had to pick a different one, it'd probably be Jedi Survivor, which I'll get around to at some point. It's another one where, especially for a single player game, it looks so good. I want to play it. I love the first one. I don't know if I want to spend $70 on it right now.
Yeah.
I had 3 for a while. It's down to 2 because I finally bit the bullet and bought Baldur's Gate, which has been a great investment. I've enjoyed every second of it, and I can't wait to play more. I'm only 10 hours into it, so just cracking the surface of what that has to offer. I also have Jedi Survivor. I played the shit out of Jedi Fallen Order, loved it. But when Jedi Survivor came out, there was a lot of bugs. I mean, when any game comes out, there's a lot of kinks and fixes. So I was waiting for that to kind of settle down. It seems like the reviews have gone up since its release. So that's about that time. And then the other one, it's a little bit older. I have yet to play Hogwarts Legacy. So that's on there as well. As someone who grew up on Harry Potter, I would love to play that. And I'm waiting for the Steam Christmas sale. It's coming. And I'll grab both of those at that time.
I finally
Steam
loaded
sales.
mine up, and I also have Stray, and I have Blood Bowl 3.
Ooh, Stray. That's one game that I heard a lot of good things about, but never watched and never played. So you'll have to let me know.
Eventually, I'll get to it. But honestly, it looks really interesting. Like the concept of it is really cool.
Mhm.
But either of you play Blood Bowl?
No.
Not familiar.
If you like the D&D-esque kind of idea, or like the high fantasy, and you like the trying to think of this, like some of the combat stuff, right? With D&D, it can be similar. It's like football with high fantasy D&D, but they're typically monsters and all of that stuff. You can kill like the other players while playing football. It's pretty funny and a little goofy, so highly
That sounds
recommend.
up my alley. So
Yeah, I can you mentioned Baldur's Gate before
Mhm.
starting, so that makes a lot of sense. Something that honestly I could see you probably enjoying. So
Absolutely. All right, moving into our more pertinent topic of debate tonight. The ongoing debate on what platform is better, PC or console. So I kind of wanted to start and go around and talk about everyone's experience with both platforms. I know I've dabbled in a bit of both, but I kind of want to know where everyone's kind of starting from.
I have a really bizarre history because I technically started on PC, but I started on Mac. And I started on Mac in about 1997, 98. So, very different era of gaming, especially for that platform. I didn't get into uh, PC Linux gaming until about 6 or 7 years ago. Had a bunch of consoles while I was growing up. I had a Nintendo 64, I had a Game Boy Color, I had Game Boy Advance. Never went into DS, but I had Wii, had GameCube, and one of my good friends growing up had everything. I remember going to his house when uh, probably in the first few weeks I had known him, and he had a Nintendo 64, a Sega Dreamcast, a PlayStation 1, and an original Xbox, which uh, nobody at that time had four systems. That was just, it was unheard of. So it was kind of insane. But he was the one who he was the one who kind of inspired me to fall in love with games, and he ended up he's had every major console as far as I can remember, but he was definitely bigger into the Xbox games, so he was the one who got me into Halo and Halo 2 and Halo 3 and a lot of Halo.
interesting. I think when you kind of already started like on an interesting path, because I don't know if I would put handhelds in that same realm as consoles at first. I was thinking about that when you first posed that question. But if you do count handheld, I guess that would be kind of where I got my start too. I mean, my first handheld would have been a Pokemon game that I got for Christmas when I was 4 years old, right? Got my Game Boy Color, all that good stuff. But then, most of my consoles growing up, it was whatever game I thought was interesting at the time that typically ended up being some sort of console specific game. Like I grew up playing a lot of PlayStation, a lot of PS2, specifically like Kingdom Hearts and single player games. Fell in love with Fire Emblem and that whole series. So ended up having a ton of different consoles for that as well, right? Because those are all going to be Nintendo exclusive games. But if we're talking from a competitive standpoint, I played Super Smash Brothers Brawl somewhat competitively. I used to go to tournaments for that. My mom would kind of drive me around, drop me off. I would play locals, going for that. And then I ended up getting a little bit into Pokemon, and then I switched to PC and pretty much stayed strong on PC sometime around 2011, somewhere around there. And I didn't really get my first good computer until like 2013, right? So it really, uh, that's interesting that you're kind of pushing more towards those handhelds as being console games, right? Because I don't really think of I think of handhelds as kind of their own category.
I want to get into Noxus history, but
Yeah,
just to touch on that real quick, I do think we need to consider them to be consoles simply because the Switch exists.
yeah. Well, the Switch changes the game, but we'll get to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my very first, if we're counting handhelds, console would have been a Game Boy Advanced. I still remember having my Bratz game. It was the light of my life. I loved it so very much. That was my first introduction. And then I remember being around when the Wii came out, and we had a Wii to start. It's actually, fun fact, I just went to my parents' house the other day, right here on my nightstand. That's my old Wii. I just plucked it from the TV that it's been at for 13 years, and I'm going to start it up, hopefully soon, and play some of those games for more of this nostalgia factor. But I played on the Wii forever, and I was pretty much Nintendo only. I had a Nintendo DS, and had the Wii, had a Switch when it first came out. But when I was about 16 and I was see Zach pulling out his Game Boy Color. But when I was about 16, I kind of discovered online competitive gaming through people like Jacksepticeye and Markiplier. And I was like, oh, this PlayStation thing is actually pretty cool. Like, I've never really done anything outside of like Super Mario Bros. Or Super Smash, but I was like, oh, Overwatch looks really interesting, or this game looks really interesting. So when I had my first job at 16, I bought my first PlayStation. It was the PS4. I bought 2 games. They were The Last of Us and Overwatch, and they were the only 2 games I played for 6 years. So I was pretty much only on my PlayStation until I was about 2-3 years ago now. I was playing Overwatch on my console, and I hated that I was so bad. I could not aim with the sticks. I was getting so frustrated. I was hard stuck bronze and competitive. I was so mad. I went, I'm going to buy a PC. So I went on Facebook Marketplace and I bought a $400 jerry-rigged office computer that had a 1050 Ti in it. And I started my PC gaming adventure. And now I've been able to level up since then. But definitely like a full... I moved about 6 months ago, and my PlayStation, I think, is still in this cupboard behind me. I don't think it's been pulled out yet. So I've definitely completely switched over to PC, and I have not touched a console in a long time, except for my Switch Lite that I carry around.
So let's kind of talk about that, the handheld being a console game, right? Because I think, when we look at the difference between console and PC, I think most people think about it from a competitive standpoint. That's kind of where my mind would go, right?
Oh, for sure. And I feel like there's a separate conversation to be had there because they are just different. I think, though, one of the things to keep in mind, actually, and Paradox, I don't know if you've actually gotten a good chance to see this, but I know Nox and I both watch Flats from time to time. And he did a really great couple videos where it was him and Karq and Emong and
J3.
And I forget who their last one was. Might have been ML7? It was another support. But it was
ML7, SK, Somnus, they'll come through.
I don't remember who was their fifth, but I know it was the 4 of them, and they were all on PC, and they were playing against 5 of the top 500 console players.
Mm-hmm.
And the matches ended up being a lot closer than I think most people would have thought, despite that difference.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it depends. Like the top players for any of these platforms are always going to be somewhat competitive with them. Is that the top players are still always going to be those top players, right? Mm-hmm. That it's something that we would see very similarly in any traditional sport, right? Football, soccer, doesn't necessarily matter. This team 9 times out of 10 could end up beating this other team, but because we only play one game, there's that 10% chance that team could lose, right? Mm-hmm. So when you look at some of those stalwarts, like, Flats, he's been around now for ever, right? When he's going to go against these console gamers, it's there's still going to be those up and coming players that are kind of at the top of their game, right? They should be competitive. It's not going to be this massive gap that we kind of see. The gap that we see typically when we look at games that have cross-platform, because I know that's what we're referencing a lot in these situations, yes, is that it's going to be the lower ranks. It's going to be typically the lower middle ranks. Like what a platinum console player, let's just use Overwatch as an example, because I know you both, are big in Overwatch, or maybe not anymore. But the platinum players and the diamond players, those are going to be the ones that, like a diamond PC player, would be masters on console, right? Just hands down. That no question about it, right? Mm-hmm. A masters player on PC probably is going to be GC on console, right? Really, no questions asked there. But that top GC player on console still has to get within a particular percentage point to where they're going to be and have a deep understanding of the game that a normal PC GC player was going to have, right? So I don't know. If you're looking at some of those top console players, they're still developing innate skills that are going to be transferable to other games, or to, the game when it eventually goes and they move it to PC.
That's a
I think you
point.
bring up a good point too, just of like game sense. Like I think especially
Yeah.
games like Overwatch and understanding how the game works, how to operate within a team. Like there's things like that that isn't just raw aim. Because I think a lot of the debate is how can you maneuver, like how can sticks match up against point and click? Like a mouse is always going to be simpler to aim
Mouse
at
and
the end of the
keyboard is
day.
always going to be superior. I mean, the truth of the matter is that as an input device, like it is simply more versatile. I mean, the ability to go buy a different mouse and just put different buttons on your right hand, where like that's not even an option for most device for most consoles. The only one I can think of is like realistically, truthfully, like yeah, I know there's you can get the paddles and stuff
Okay. I
so
was gonna say,
you can
yeah.
kind of move a couple things, but it's not like you can be like, hey man, I really want more buttons on my right hand. Like there's a very hard limit to that where it's like PC, you can be like, I want to have 12 buttons accessible to my right thumb.
Yeah.
Well, I still remember watching Emong specifically. He must have had a number pad on the side of his mouse for Overwatch, and when you look at the inputs, it mirrors what the player is seeing. So when you would watch him stream, you could see what all his inputs were.
Mhm.
And I still remember vividly going, why is his alt button num9? So he
Yeah.
had his alt tied to his thumb on his mouse. And I was like, that's wild. Because that's something like you can't do that on console. I mean, obviously, like you talked about paddles, there's things that you can add, but the versatility within mouse and keyboard.
I
As
feel like the only thing that I can see that has even come close to that in the console market, and it's actually a really cool device, and you can use it with PC as well, is the Xbox Gamepad, which I don't know if either of you are familiar with,
mhm.
but it's an accessibility controller that basically has, I forget what it is, it's like 20 inputs, but they're just eighth mil jacks. So you have to provide physical buttons basically, but it's used a lot for people who don't have full mobility in their hands or have other disabilities so that they can connect a device that lets them, click buttons with their jaw or, shift side to side to get movement. Very, very cool device, but it's the only thing that I think
Mm-hmm.
even comes close in that category.
I was just gonna point this out. I have a Razer Naga, right?
Yep.
With my 12 buttons on the side because I come from MOBA gaming, right? I typically will use this. I use all my items on 6, and then I'll typically end up programming the other 12. This is kind of dirty. Not have that on screen too often. But, you know, I love it. I absolutely love it because I actually do use the buttons. And I have my melee for Overwatch programmed to like num5 or something stupid,
Every
right?
game I go into, I have to reprogram my melee so it's
Eh,
on my mouse.
Because again, when I used to not have it, I think my melee on Overwatch was V or something like that. And that way there I had it on my thumb and I could jump and melee, right? Like that was one thing.
Hmm.
Or, I think I used to have it like really close with to like Z or something like that. So, you could do like hot one shots, right? But, you know, eh, when you look at the controllers have gotten a lot more sophisticated, right? Like I do actually want to point that out. There are some, secondary markets. Battle Beaver, Scuffed, come to mind just as being two very popular ones. And usually what they do is they do a mouse 3 button, right?
Hmm.
So they typically have a mouse 3 button. They're typically paddles on the underside of the actual controller. So you typically have the 2 up here, and then you have a third one underneath. You also have the Scuff controllers where they usually have like Scuff caps. So it makes it's essentially like lowering your DPI on a mouse, right? It makes it a lot more accurate. It makes you, have a lot more control over the stick, right? So controllers have gotten more sophisticated over the past couple of years, and that's probably where you are going to see a little bit of some gap closing.
Hmm.
But if we're talking 5 years ago, yeah, no, of course, like any console gamer is going to be at a significant disadvantage. It's worse hardware. I'm sorry. That's just a fact, right?
Mhm.
You're paying a quarter of what you would be paying for a computer
I
to
want to
get a
come back to that
console.
because that's a good one. That's a really interesting one these days.
What, the quarter or
The
the
hardware.
hardware, right? Again, looking at the old hardware, I'm looking at like PS3s and PS4s, right?
No,
Uh,
it's the other way. It's way more interesting than that.
oh, okay, interesting. Okay. But like I don't know, do you guys know about like Sony's deal with the Call of Duty League?
Not familiar with it, no.
Up until like 4 years ago, Call of Duty was played on PlayStation. at the professional level because Sony had some major deal and was forcing everybody to play on PlayStation, right? Which is fine when everybody's on the same skill, or not skill, when everyone's on the same hardware, right? It doesn't necessarily matter if you're on a PC or a console, but it essentially meant that if you were an Xbox and if you played Call of Duty on Xbox prior to that, or if you had some other kind of controller, if you were a mouse and keyboard person, forget it, right? You were at like a significant disadvantage. And now, even after the league has moved away from it and has moved to PCs, the most popular way to play Call of Duty is on a PlayStation, right? So and Rocket League. Rocket League's another good example of a game where it's mostly played on PCs, but the players play on controller, right? So I think you do have a lot of these games where, yeah, we can say it has more buttons and more buttons are more versatility, and this gives us some advantages, but there's certain games that pair very well with being a controller game because you don't need that many buttons.
I think an interesting one, I don't know if this will tangent or not, another really popular game out there that's played at the competitive level, mostly on controller, is Apex Legends.
Mm-hmm.
And that's for an interesting reason. That's when you start getting into the debate of aim assist. I was actually talking to Zach about this the other day. We were going through the top players like ranking system of the current season of Apex, and it's ranked off of the controller players because they're the ones at the competitive level. That's what they were ranking off of. And funny enough, the top used hero in the game is actually Bangalore at that level, which sounds kind of weird because she's a starter character, she's been around forever, but the reason she's used so much at the competitive high level is because with her smoke grenades that she uses as one of her tacticals, the aim assist does not work through it. So as a controller player at that level, you're at a severe disadvantage if you're used to having a level of aim assist and you have a character that completely negates that. So I thought that was really interesting, but Apex is another one of those games that the top players out there are all on console and not PC.
I feel like Apex is also one that punishes it more. It punishes non-aim assist people more, specifically because there is a lot more to factor in. It's not, Call of Duty, half the heroes in Overwatch at this point are all hit scan, where it basically just draws a line from wherever the shooter's camera is pointing to what the target is, what the reticle is on. And it immediately just says, here's the line, it's drawn in one frame, that's the hit, there's no if, and, or but. Whereas in Apex, it's like, no, okay, somebody's pressed the trigger, okay, it's going to go out in this trajectory, cool, it's going to start dropping off. You have to deal with 6 other factors, and there's travel time.
Mm-hmm.
Where, aim assist on that, you're factoring in 6 other factors that it's helping mitigate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, Halo also has aim assist, if I'm not mistaken.
Halo on console does. I don't believe PC has it at all.
And that's what it is. So, I mean, aim assist is a whole other basket that, I mean, yeah, it's how much does it actually help the player? And there hasn't been a consistent way to implement it across games. And so you will see a lot of those discrepancies like you mentioned with Apex, right? It's interesting that it's an early game hero. That's something I didn't necessarily know, but it would make sense because, again, if the balance that may be like an issue with just the balance in the game itself, but it also could just, like you said, be a balance between the aim assist for it. I think there isn't. I think it really does come down to a hardware issue. So I'm interested to hear what you were going to make, Zach, with like the hardware difference between PC and console, because then it'll segue into something else that I want to bring up. So go ahead.
All right, kids, settle in. We're going to start with some story time.
Oh boy.
Okay. So let's go back a few years to the release of the PS3.
A few years.
Okay. So around the time that the PS3 comes out, the United States Air Force is looking around to build a supercomputer. And they're getting all their quotes, and they're going to Intel, they're going to AMD, and they're laughing at AMD probably, but that's just the state of AMD at that time. But they're talking to Intel, and Intel's giving them a quote, and they're saying, that's a lot of money. And then one of them happens to go look at the wonderful new PS3. It's got that Blu-ray player that everybody's so excited about. And what they realize is, oh, we can boot Linux on this. Well, that's interesting. What is the price to performance ratio on a PS3? And more importantly, what is the performance per watt? Because that's a lot more important at that scale of a computer. And they figure out that it was some ridiculous amount. It was way more worthwhile for them to do it. And they ended up buying something like a few thousand PlayStation 3s, booting Linux onto all of them and networking them together and making their own supercomputer because it was just way more efficient. So every time a console comes out, a major console, with the exception of Nintendo, we can talk about Nintendo separately for a second after, but most of the major consoles in the year that they come out, they are the more price competitive option, and they're offering better performance than a PC at the same price point. Sometimes at much higher price points. With the last generation of Xbox. So what are we on? Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5?
Yes.
Those are Ryzen second gen chips with RDNA 2 chips, I think, for the GPUs. So in terms of PC stuff, yeah, they're 2 generations old, but they were much more tightly integrated. And you also have a platform where every single programmer who's creating software for it knows exactly what hardware it's going to be on, what the bugs are going to be, how they can deal with them, and they're going to QA for them rather than PC, where you do have to deal with some of the more nitpicky bits. Driver compatibility is always a thing. It's always going to be a thing, and
Just putting it together and it not working and having a CPU that's running at 1.4 gigahertz for whatever reason.
That doesn't sound like it's from experience at all.
No, definitely wasn't out of PC for 3 months.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Knox's PC, when it was put together, had a very weird issue where the CPU wasn't running up, but she touched base with me and a couple of our other IT literate folks in our Discord server and couldn't figure out what was going on. And as it turns out, there was just a weird installation of Windows, and for some reason the driver order mattered when it was getting installed. And I believe you had to take it to a repair tech in order to get it.
Yeah, I took it to a local shop. 2 days later, he was like, I don't know. It didn't crash for me. I reinstalled Windows, running fine. $80 later, I had a working computer and I never looked back.
And that is a downside of the hobby, truth be told. But it is one of those things that you deal with because it is much more worthwhile in the end. But when it comes to console hardware, it is impressive how much they put in. I know one of the really, really big things that came out of the latest generation. So the PS5 actually has a version of memory access. So for people who are super unfamiliar with how computers work in general, RAM is something that you have in most computers, which is considered to be short-term memory. So when a CPU has to do something, it can only do one thing at a time per core, per thread, technically, but we don't need to get that technical. And when it needs to store something and say, hey, I need this in a second, just hold on to it, it'll first put it on its cache, but then it starts putting things onto RAM. Sony had a really interesting implementation that they put into the tech called direct access storage. So with new modern storage devices, these NVMe SSDs, you can tell the processor that they don't need to go to the RAM. They can actually start accessing things directly off the SSD. And particularly, it's really good for GPUs and their RAM for accessing texture files. So I know that a lot of asset loading on PS5 right now is actually faster than it is on most PC games.
Wow.
Interesting.
The one exception to this is Nintendo, but Nintendo seems to have some odd philosophy of going back 2 generations every time they're designing a console. So you end
Again,
up with something like the Switch, where it was underpowered when it came out, and now how many years later has it been? 5 years, 6 years since the Switch came out,
yeah,
and
it's been a
it's still incredibly
It's been
underpowered. And
longer, but yes.
you have issues where the last Pokemon game came out and it doesn't run correctly for anybody because it just doesn't have the horsepower.
Of course. Right. And then you have people who are like, oh, let me just emulate it onto PCs. And then it's like, okay, it's fine
And
on
suddenly the
PCs.
game works great.
Yeah,
Minus
it's
the
Yeah,
like,
other
has-
wow.
bugs for that one, but
Have either of you tried to play a game like Overwatch or Apex on the Switch?
I have not.
Overwatch, yeah, because I was interested.
Holy cow.
It's very funny. It's very funny.
It is. Look, I know I haven't been on the sticks in forever, but I pulled that thing out once. I downloaded it. I was stoked. I could bring it to work with me, and I was like ready to like suit up at work and play Overwatch. It was the worst experience of my life.
It's funny. It's not an experience. It's just funny.
No.
You just you're just trying to play this game and you know exactly how it's supposed to run, and of course not. It's not going to run that way because that's just the way that the hardware is kind of written.
Mm-hmm.
I was curious. So when do you think the PS3 was actually released? Because I didn't think it was long ago, but it's pretty long.
It's like 2006, if I had to guess.
What's your guess?
I
You
have
can
no
double
clue.
down.
I'm gonna put it 2010.
2006 was right on the money.
Nice.
So Borat was released that year. Bird flu was discovered. Pluto was downgraded as a planet. Steve Irwin died. And there was one other fun thing that I
And
found.
Knox was 6 years old.
Oh my gosh. Really?
Yes.
All right. Oh, Google purchased YouTube. That was the other big
Oh,
thing. And I was like, damn,
wow.
Oh yeah,
Big
yeah.
year.
that was a big year. So I
Back
just
in
thought that
my
was interesting.
day,
Yeah, I know, right? And then
you could-
also like you had the big bulky PS3s, so I'm just imagining of like daisy chaining a bunch of bulky PS3s trying to run like Linux on them.
oh, supercomputers are easy because you put it all together with networking. So you just put a LAN port on it or plug it into a switch.
Yeah, but I'm thinking of the bulky PS3s, like the original PS3s. You know what I mean, with like the dome top versus
yeah.
like the slim versions that they came.
Oh my
Oh,
god.
they
know,
definitely
thinking about, like-
stripped those things.
Well, again, how many Blu-ray players did they have to strip off? You know what I mean? Or like the ability to, right? Like,
You know what? That's fair.
get you thinking because it's probably just all the original ones. But going with the Switch,
I'm
because
imagining
that's
some guy at the Air Force who's like, "Hey, so we have all these Blu-ray players. You guys ever want to build a laser?"
Yeah, exactly, right? Like, what's going on? Where's the Blu-ray players? Right, that's what I want to know. I specifically bought a PS3, one of the old ones, because one, I wanted to play old PS3 games, but two, I didn't have a Blu-ray player. So I was like, let me go find one at GameStop, and actually did find one and bought it, and it works perfect. So, and then I have another one that doesn't work that I got at Savers for $5 to literally use it as spare parts for the if the other
It's
one
actually it's funny. So one of the reasons why the newer revisioned PS3s. So after I forget what it was, like the second
the
revision.
PS3 Slims, we'll call them.
No, it was before the Slims because it was
okay.
still like the full size one, but there was like an actual there's a software revision at one point where they locked out the ability to install Linux
Oh wow.
because they were like, we don't want people doing this and we don't want to sell any more to the Air Force.
Makes sense.
Air Force, please stop calling us. Lose our number.
Yeah.
But the Switch is interesting because it's not necessarily an issue hardware wise, right? The hardware on the Switch is lackluster compared to PlayStation or an Xbox. That's just true, right? The PlayStation and Xbox, again, they're made to be mini computers. The main problem with the Switch is the network. That is the actual issue with the Switch, right? When you're playing on a Switch and you're trying to play Overwatch on a Switch, it's nigh unplayable plugged in, but then you have people who are playing in handheld mode. Think about that for a minute. Like again, if you're playing handheld mode, right? You mentioned you tried playing it from work. I'm assuming you're not bringing your whole docking system. And you got like 2 wires pulling out of this thing, right? Like, no, you're going to try and play it in handheld mode. Yeah, exactly. You're going to carry it in that nice little carrying case, bring it with you.
I don't even have the ability to put it into console mode. I own
because
a light.
it's a light. Yeah.
Also
So
right.
again, that's going to be your main problem, because Switches use P2P connections. They don't actually use like a full server-based connection. That's why if you actually play a game like Pokemon Unite, right, which is a game that is actually made for the competitive Switch after they kind of figured out the bugs on how to do P2P after the issues that happened with Super Smash Brothers, that it plays pretty good, right? I don't know if anyone's played Unite. Highly recommend the game. Lots of fun. Great way to blow off steam. But the game plays very, very well on the Switch when everything's said and done. Now, it is a lower intensity game because it is kind of that top down, and it's more of a map based game, and MOBAs aren't very network intensive to begin with, but it still plays very well. And what most people don't realize, if you're not in the competitive Smash scene, there's a mod that you can just put on your Switch to fix any sort of the connection issues. It's the latency mod. And people use that, and they say, when they put the latency mod on, they don't really tell the difference between when they're playing on LAN and when they're playing on the latency mod. Right? It fixes that network connection for that game in particular. So it's weird because console games are in a very new spot, right, than where they have been in the past, in my mind.
One of the things I wanted to bring up is that, PC is, the Switch has had a very dominant hold on its niche in the market, because there were competitors in the handheld space for some time. I mean, PSP was a thing that existed, and it did well enough. I didn't see a lot of them, but I know it was more popular in circles outside of my own. But Nintendo has had a vice grip on that for so long, and the Switch has just made it even more so.
Yeah.
I also think Nintendo has always gone after a different group anyway, too. Like,
oh yeah, that's been their philosophy.
Like, the Wii was, yes, in terms of how it sets on a TV stand, like a PS3, like a Xbox 360. Like, it came out in the same era, but it was never after the people who already had a PlayStation. It was never after the people who already had an Xbox. It was a complete, because of the remotes and how you played it, it was always after a different group of gamers, in my opinion.
Nintendo has more and more focused on the, hey, we're going to do family gaming.
Yeah.
And it's worked out very well for them.
And the Wii was the main cornerstone of that, right?
Yep.
It's not a controller. You give your controller to your mom, your dad, your aunt, your uncle, your grandma, grandpa. They're not going to know what to do with it, right? When, Knox, apparently you're too young to remember this, but, Zach and I, the N64, right? When that first thing came out, and there was a Joy-Con.
You got me there.
I'm sorry, but the N64, that thing looks crazy. You look at the original controller with that.
People are still figuring out how to hold that thing.
How do I hold this thing? It doesn't make sense. How am I supposed
are you familiar with that controller?
I'm looking it up right now.
Okay.
Oh God, no! You have to look it up.
Oh, that's wild! It's got a third arm. That's crazy.
Yes.
Have you really never seen an N64?
No, I've seen it. No,
okay.
I have. I just had to look it up. It's. I couldn't draw it for you from memory, but I had to place it.
Okay. So my existential crisis was averted there. But when that first came out, that was what the hell is going on here, right? This thing made no sense. But again, the market was these large RPG games that we really didn't have yet in that market. You had a little bit of Final Fantasy, but again, the N64 is known for Banjo-Kazooie, Mario 64, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, right? Some of these games that are considered some of the greatest of all time, Ocarina of Time, one of them, right? And, N64 or Mario 64 having the largest speedrunning community. These games are still these stalwarts, but look at how that controller was made, right? It's still marketing to a particular group of people, but I think what it really comes down to is a lot of the exclusives that we necessarily see. Nintendo is not willing to give a lot of their IPs to different publishers. You have to buy a Switch. And the thing is they've done a really good job that if I buy this Switch, I'm going to have a lot of different exclusives that are going to be on this, right? This is the most efficient console for me to buy. Versus, what am I buying an Xbox? what is the actual reason I'm buying an Xbox at this point? Halo? I'm going to play that on PC now. If I don't own a PC, then yeah, sure, I'll go buy an Xbox. What am I going to buy a PlayStation for at this? Spider-Man, right? A fantastic game. Don't get me wrong. Played it, loved it, right? But realistically, not like if I'm not really into Spider-Man, right? That's really one of their only exclusives that they're going to have. Versus the Switch, I've got Brawl. I got Super Smash Brothers, just the genre in general. So that's been a major piloter for the Switch. Pokemon now being
Pokemon, the biggest franchise in the world.
the biggest media franchise in the world and having its 3 most recent mainline games on the Switch, right? That's going to drive sales. Animal Crossing, which obviously blew up because of the pandemic, right? But again, unexclusive. Kirby, Zelda, Breath of the Wild, right? Literally pioneering the open world genre and what it can be, and arguably making one of the greatest, open world games. And I'm saying a lot of opinions that if people, when they're listening, they're going to probably get upset. But realistically, like, this is the most efficient console for the titles that I'm going to be working if I'm looking for exclusive titles, right? I'm going to go buy a Switch.
I think whether or not you agree with the opinion, you actually have to say that there is an argument to be made.
Yeah, exactly. There is an argument to be made that, again, there's 6 really specific gaming categories, and Nintendo probably has number 1 or number 2 in those gaming categories, like platformers, RPGs, turn-based, open world, right? There's so many of these. Racing, even, like, when you kind of look at like the biggest Mario Kart, obviously, if we're looking competitive racing, that's different. But there's a lot of these games that are exclusive for the Switch that, guess what? I don't give a shit about the hardware, right? Because it can run it fine or good enough, right? Yeah, Pokemon doesn't run great, but it still runs on it, right? So if I'm looking at this console for that, hell no, I'm not buying this to play Overwatch. What the fuck am I doing?
Yeah.
I'm buying a computer.
Scarlet and Violet were the best-selling Pokemon games of all time.
Yeah. I'm buying a computer, or I'm putting it on my Xbox, right? Like, if I'm buying this to play Overwatch, then I'm doing something wrong, right? And it's understanding that from the console space, I think, is really.
I do want to re-centralize this real quick, and just bring us back to our main topic. And just one thing that I wanted to just discuss was longevity of devices. And I feel like it is something that PC has mastered in a lot of ways. It's not perfect, but it is mastered in a lot of ways that console is just never going to compete with. And it's actually gotten worse as time has gone on. One of the things that we are coming to face more and more as time goes on is online gaming. There are so many games now that are required to be online, and as soon as those servers go down, the game doesn't exist. It just disappears. And there's there's a few generations where that doesn't matter. Nobody's worried about their Nintendo 64 game disappearing right now. Pretty sure that's been put up on how many different ROM hack sites at this point that it'll probably live forever. But I remember there was huge discussions when some of the original Halo servers were going down for Halo 2 and Halo 3, because it was, wow, here's this huge piece of gaming history that's just going to disappear. And then we got lucky with those ones because MCC came out, and it may not be perfect, it may not be exactly the same, but it's pretty darn close. But there's so many games that are just going to evaporate. And unless there are community-led programs that are going to continue to try and run those servers to a dedicated fan base, or things get open sourced, there are just so many titles that are just going to completely and entirely disappear. And on console, it kind of doesn't. If they disappear, it's gone. There's no second chance. Whereas on PC, somebody can decide to reverse engineer. Forget which game somebody decided to go recompile the source code on not too long ago, which is a freaking massive endeavor.
I think bring up an interesting concept there where, look, we all know. Nox, did you build your PC?
I did.
Yeah. Zach helped me build mine. Zach built
Zach
his.
also helped me build mine.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
I have a
so
habit. I'm sorry.
it's fun, and I know how to do that now. And I literally have a box with a new power supply that's going to be more because I have too many monitors, and I noticed that I wasn't able to put enough power through it. Right? Like, I'm sitting here with 5 monitors right now. Like, fuck it, right? And so the versatility of that and being able to spend like $100 to upgrade my system is really key. Whereas with a console, it's $500 if I want to upgrade that system, or $400, and I'm
you're not
losing
upgrading it.
progress, and I'm not upgrading it. I'm buying a whole new system, right? I'm doing all these different things, and it's like I'm losing out on either progress I made maybe in a previous game, or maybe that I run the risk of not being backwards compatible, right? I run the risk of so many other things when I'm upgrading my console system. And the upgrades that we've seen over the past couple of years aren't even enough to warrant a new generation of a console, right? We've seen upgrades to the PlayStation 5. We've seen upgrades to the current Xbox system. The Switch going from, the OLED is not a true upgrade, but it is an upgrade. It is a slightly better hardware and slightly better screen and all these other small things. But in the end, it's not a true upgrade, right? It's where PCs are always going to have a major upper hand over any sort of consoles.
For anybody who was watching the video, I'm pointing to a white box behind me. That's a computer that is old components I had and a couple of things I bought for $150. It's literally a whole new gaming PC, and it's a gift for somebody in our Discord server.
Mhm.
That was going to be a next piece that I get, is the fact that PC games in particular, unless you're getting some of the newer games, most of the specifications that you need to run these games and be competitive in them is minuscule, right? I was playing League of Legends on a Windows Vista PC when I first started, right? And it was fine, right? I would
There was a
ban
time I was playing League on my MacBook Air
Yeah.
2015 last year, and it wasn't pretty,
No,
but it was playable.
it's playable, right? And that's kind of the key difference there, is that, I'm playing it at like 30 frames, and there's certain characters that will cause lag issues. I remember, playing League on the Vista and like having to ban LeBlanc because the her ring when she would press W, it was
Mhm.
so load intensive on my computer that I would go down to 7 frames, right?
Oh.
I would just have to eat whatever she was going to throw at me, right? And
Mhm.
so, you know, you are at a slight disadvantage when you're playing some of these games, but you can get away very, very cheap in a lot of these games and be competitive in a cheap PC. And then again, if you want to upgrade and you have the means and you have the money, why not? Anyone here going to buy a 4090 when those come out?
No.
No,
No.
of course not. We're all going to wait, right? Like, what is the point of buying that next gen cartridge unless it's like, okay, what are you, unless you're playing like Baldur's Gate or something like that, or like WoW, or like some of the more intensive,
But
even though WoW's not intensive.
but even like things like Baldur's Gate, like they might not run perfectly on older gen cards, but so my PC is about a year old now. Is that where we're at? About a year. I had like I talked about, a jerry-rigged office computer turned gaming computer for the first 2 years. And I had a 1050 Ti in there, and I have recently gifted that to one of my best friends so that she could get into PC gaming. And I have also recently gifted her Baldur's Gate for Christmas because she loves D&D. Now, has she noticed that it doesn't look as good as it does on my computer? Yes. That's a 1050 Ti versus a 3060. Like, it's just going to be there. But she still enjoys it. It's still playable. And that computer is probably worth no more than $250 at this point. But she's able to enjoy all of the games that she could imagine on a system that isn't even as expensive as going to get a new Xbox would be right now.
On a game that came out, 6 months ago?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that is something to mention is just, DRM, just as a general thing,
Mm.
So one of the things that I dabble in every once in a while is good old games, which I don't know if any of you guys have really touched on at all. The same folks who at CD Projekt Red um, runs them as well, but who's the developer behind Cyberpunk and Witcher. But Good Old Games is their game storefront where their whole shtick is they'll reach out to developers for older titles, titles that came out in the 90s, in the early 2000s, and work with them to basically strip out of the DRM, recompile them for PC if they need to be recompiled, and make them in a state that is enjoyable today. So, one of the games that I grew up with was Heroes of Might and Magic, the first one, as well as the third one. I really love the third one. The first one I played, though, when it was out and new, um, back in '97. But the fact that I can go boot that up and run that on this is phenomenal. Whereas, how many people are playing Melee these days and they have to go find an original GameCube?
Mm-hmm. Well,
Because it's the only hardware you can find, or you're emulating. But at that point, you've got a PC. You're just falling into the same thing.
we don't talk about Slippy, but I had to move this anyways. Figured I'd just do this. This is my old PC. This is
For anybody
a
not watching
pre-built-
the video, he's holding up an Alienware PC.
Oh yeah, and I mean, if they saw me on the video and I was being really distracting while you were talking, it's fine. Just trying to get this down. But like, this thing was $700, right? When I first bought it, it was out of box or something like that, and it's got like a 2080 Ti graphics card, 16 gigs of RAM. Actually, now it has 64 gigs of RAM because I just had extra RAM sticks, right? And I threw them in here because fuck it, right? And I
Plug
think
and
it's
play.
got like an i7. Yeah, it's got an i7. Look at that. You can maybe see the sticker. No, you can't see the camera,
No,
but
it's
it's got an
blown
i7,
out, but
right? Like, and you see my whole desk shaking. But this thing's a monster, and it was $700, right? And I just have it now. And I have a whole nother case and a whole nother PC, and I have other shit that I can do, right? Like, honestly, when you look at this is fine. This is going to run all my games fine. This runs Overwatch perfectly fine. This runs Legends perfectly fine. It would run Baldur's Gate perfectly fine, right? So why did I upgrade? It's because I'm a sweating gamer. There's literally no other reason for me to upgrade my PC other than clout, other than fuck it. My current PC, Zach knows. How much RAM do I got?
too much. I remember it was too
Yeah.
much. Did you get 64 gigs?
Yeah, so I have 32 gig sticks and I have 4 of them, so it's 128 gigs of RAM.
God,
Why?
we need to
I
trade
don't fucking
PCs.
know. What's the point, right? Because I could, right? It's all
Too fast.
DDR4 3600s, right? And then
And it's already out of date.
and it's already out of date, right? Like, it's been maybe a year, about a year at this point.
At about 2, man.
Oh, ready for why I upgraded my PC?
Go for it.
Zach will get a kick out of this. He was there when we found this out. I popped open my jerry-rigged office computer because I had been gifted a 3060 for Christmas, and I was so excited to put this card in my computer, only to find out it didn't have It didn't have PCIe connectors, right?
You didn't have a
Is that-
PCIe power connector.
So it couldn't even handle the card. There was no
Yeah.
way it was going to handle. So instead of maybe exchanging the graphics card for something that could fit in my computer, I built a whole new PC around it.
Why not?
I went and spent $1,200. We built a whole new PC, and now that graphics card is the most outdated piece of hardware in the computer.
And for anybody who might
Why?
get upset, I did go look. The power supply wasn't upgradable.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. He's really smart at it. I'm not. He told me it was good. Whatever. But
Again, go ahead.
why? Why not? Because my games run, I can see everything. I get 100, get 150 frames when I play League. It's insane. Do I need 150 frames to play League? No.
Fuck no.
I can see everything though.
Why do I have 5 monitors? Because I can. Right? Like, I can swivel this one. Who cares, right? Because I can, right? And that's the thing. I can't do that on console. Bringing it back, right? Like, I can't. There's just no way to do this. There's no way to really upgrade the individual hardware that I am working with within these consoles unless I buy a whole new one. And that's a big issue. And it will always be a pretty significant issue, right?
Mhm.
Um, so that kind of leads into something else I wanted to bring up more specifically is that when you look at this from a competitive standpoint, there are actually a lot of issues with like hardware consistency when going in between, when I work with students and when I work with, going to a lot of these events.
Mhm.
I have students that, they're coming from all sorts of different monitor types. They're coming from 60 hertz, they're coming from 120 hertz, doesn't necessarily matter. I had one kid who had a wheel missing on his chair. And so what he did when he got to campus was his chair, he took a wheel off so that it had a lean because that's how he aimed. That's how he played Overwatch. And that's how he was more comfortable aiming, right? When we have these kids who they go to these events in person, they want to wear pajamas on stage because that's what they're comfortable with. They want to take their shoes off, right? Because they say they play better without their shoes. And I do have kids that will downgrade their monitors to what they're using more consistently because that's what they're used to, right? There is a sense of familiarity with playing at a certain DPI, at a certain speed, at a certain monitor refresh rate, right? And so that is something that you also really can't do on console, right?
Mhm.
There's not a way for me to get really nitty gritty with my settings, but I also don't need to, is the interesting. An Xbox is an Xbox for the most part. If I'm going to be pulling an Xbox, or if I just want to bring my Xbox to my LAN event, I can. If I'm really, really concerned about, X, Y, and Z issues that I might have with the hardware or refresh rate or something like that, that's also going to be part of the monitor. But like, that's kind of the beauty of that, where if you saw how much I struggled to even just pick this thing up from underneath my desk. It's heavy. It's a heavy piece of equipment. And there's ways to get them lighter, but this is a heavy piece of equipment. For me to like travel with this, if I was most comfortable playing on this computer, it does pose some issues.
Mm.
Mhm.
So
The
Gonna have
last thing I
to.
wanted to bring up, sorry, I had one more thing.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong. We can edit this out if I'm incorrect on this. One thing that I've thought about in my life versus when I was on console exclusively playing Overwatch versus when I moved over to PC. Correct me if I'm wrong. You cannot have Discord running on a console, right? Like that's not something you can
They
do.
have changed that, so I know you can do it on Xbox now, and I think you can do it
Okay.
on PlayStation.
I was gonna
Um,
Okay, we're
say
gonna
I
X this then.
oh
Because I was
no,
gonna bring up the point
no.
of
it's a good point to bring up because
yeah.
that is something that has changed. Consoles have become more powerful in that sense, and there's an understanding that they are just computers.
Mhm.
Microsoft, or actually the last generation, because they're both AMD processors, they literally have the same architecture. Theoretically, you could install Windows on them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I just thought like I remember when I was on my PlayStation, there's no way I could be in a Discord call with friends playing the same game unless I had another like I had my AirPods in underneath my headphones connected to my
Mhm.
phone that was running the Discord call. Whereas with my sorry, I don't have as many monitors as Paradox does. I have two. But I have my
My
Discord
bad.
on one and I have my game on the other. And coming from somebody who ran on one monitor for a long time, like that's even like crazy that I can have that.
Mhm.
Um but I think ease of the social aspect too is just when you're on a PlayStation, you got to make sure your headset's on. Does your mic work? How does it mute? How are you talking to people? Is the servers good? Like, is the voice chat working? Whereas, like, you still have those issues with Discord from time to time. Um, but it's way easier on PC. It's way more reliable. It's just a computer.
Mhm.
I think
But
probably if we wanted to wrap this up, then we can say that console may be more convenient. Console may be a more level playing field in some ways. And console has this exclusivity element to it that Nintendo in particular has managed to profit off of very, very well. But the PC is more flexible, not just in terms of what you can play, but how you can play it. Um, and even outside of that, there's other things you can do. The reason I got into PC gaming was because I wanted to do. I work in the film industry. I do film editing, so I needed a powerful computer. And well, if I'm gonna have that, I might as well have a PC for gaming as well. And that is probably the best when it comes to longevity. The PC is going to outlast any console.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really
I
good
think there's
summation.
value in them both. And I think
For
there's
sure.
something for everyone. I don't think, for example, my boyfriend has a very nice PC that he built. He does not use it. He loves his Xbox. He plays Starfield. He bought the new Xbox just to play Starfield. And he got his money's worth. I think he's put 80 hours into it. Like, loves it. And he's now playing Baldur's Gate on it. Loves it. Whereas I, once again, don't see a reason to start up my PlayStation anytime soon, other than I need a DVD player, to be so honest. It's the one thing I'm missing right now. I pulled out one of my old DVDs. I was like, oh, I should watch this movie going, I don't have my PlayStation set up. And that was the reason I needed it.
My wife is the exact same way. Again, I bought her a PC. I think that was a big Christmas gift a while ago, a couple years ago. I bought her a PC and she uses it somewhat, usually for work, but a little bit for gaming here and there. But she loves the Switch so much so that I ended up buying a second Switch so that I had my own and she had her own. Right? She fell in love with Animal Crossing. She fell in love with a lot of the comfy games, which is a whole other piece. Yeah, to touch
Love
on,
them.
but she's much happier. She loves Pikmin. Still loves again Nintendo exclusive games. Figure, but those types of games. If that's what you're into, then that's what you're into, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know we didn't necessarily touch on that, and I know we're trying to wrap this up, but the socioeconomic aspect is pretty big. And, a lot of people don't realize this, but especially within lower income household, a console is going to be a lot more available just in general, right? You want to get your kids something big, you want to get them something available and for Christmas or for birthdays or whatever else there might be, and you're terrified that you're going to buy the wrong thing on a computer, or you're terrified you're going to be, buying the wrong X, Y, and Z. It's a lot easier to spend the money on maybe a secondhand Xbox, a secondhand Switch. The Switch is $350 and a game is going to be $60. That's a one-time purchase of $410, right? That's somewhat affordable when you look at like payment plans on top of that too, versus you're looking at $1,000 purchase typically on a pre-built, because that's what the parent's going to look at, right? The person that actually has the money that's going to be able to purchase this for a kid, it's a scary purchase, right? And that's why I do see a lot of, you typically see them in, minority communities. It's tough to bring that up, but that's where you really see, especially in the fighting game communities, Smash, Tekken, Street Fighter. Most of those are people that grew up in lower economic backgrounds. So the consoles will always still have a place simply because of the accessibility that they offer to a wider variety. But I'm always going to be a gamer personally. I know that just because of the versatility and the fact that I have the means and the capability to have one and own one and have it to its full potential.
Absolutely.
I try and further this conversation by talking about my significant others, uh, but that's not a conversation we're going to get into.
So, wrapping up here, moving into our closing segment, which is focusing on the real world behind all of us. We might play online with each other, but we like to recommend what we're doing outside of it as well. Any books, movies, music, anything you're doing in your real life, recommendations, anything you want to share. Zach, do you want to kick us off?
Gosh. Oh, I've been reading some books. Been reading a lot of books. Book Talk would be very proud of me. Built a
Yes, book
VPN.
talk.
Built a VPN for a friend recently. That's been a fun thing. For anybody who's not super familiar with that, VPN, virtual private network, they're very popular for people who want to appear. You use them as a privacy thing, appear like you're somewhere else. But we had a friend in the Discord who moved to another country and she wanted to watch Hulu, and Hulu is only available in the U.S. So I built a little device that lets her hop into my network and makes her look like she's in the U.S., even though she is not. So it's a fun little thing.
Has that been working?
It has been working. It only
Good.
works on her phone. She's
Oh.
got a DNS leak somewhere on her laptop, which I told her I'd help her fix, but it does technically work. It's one of my many web devices that I'm trying to fix right now. My website is currently functional, partially. I don't know why PHP has decided it wants to brick itself, so I have to figure out why that's going wrong. Web content's fun, especially when you
Yeah.
do it as a hobby and not as a living.
For me, like, sad to say it, but video games are a pretty big part of my job
Mhm.
just to begin with. So it's sometimes hard to separate the two. But I've been doing a lot of traveling, just both for the job itself and just because I'm able to travel at this point, and I kind of love it. I just got back from Florida, literally like a couple days ago. Because why not? No one's ever been to Florida. Go to Florida. It's fun. Warm right now. I don't know.
Can go
Also,
shake hands with Florida man.
oh, true. You can go shake hands with Florida
Yeah.
man. I also went to Italy like a month ago. That was fun. So love to travel. I'm looking at like little trinkets that I have on my desk. Vatican.
You should
That's
mention
so
how you
cool.
got to Italy. Just like had that
Oh yeah, I mean,
decision-making
I just
process.
decided I wanted to go.
Just
That's
on the drop
fun
of a
part.
hat.
Yeah, just on the drop of a hat. Just we decided we wanted to
Nice.
go. So my wife and I we went for like 5 days. Also, yeah, again, viewer discretion. A lot of the things they have in Italy is they obviously do a lot with David and the statue of David. So I bought a couple of these for people as gifts, but magnet and it's David.
Very nice.
So it's just
Oh
sitting
god,
there.
I'm gonna have to blur that on YouTube.
Maybe, yeah, probably. So we'll keep it up there just for you. To blur.
Audio listeners, use your
What?
imagination.
Yeah, so lots of that, and it's an interesting country. I will definitely say that it met a lot of my expectations. A lot of history there if you're a big history nerd, so highly suggest going there if you like that. But again, it's really nice. So
Awesome. If you don't know about me, I'm a big reader. I'm the reason Zach's on Book Talk. You're welcome.
Yeah.
I love my high fantasy. I love my romance. So I try to recommend books as much as I can. I don't think this is that as if you're anyone like me who reads the books that I do, Fourth Wing is not a shock to get recommended. The second book in the 5-book series just came out last month, Iron Flame. If you're into dragons, romance, high stakes, war, rebellion, all the good stuff, and you want a fun little story with some really good romance integrated into it, I highly recommend Fourth Wing and Iron Flame. They're both like 600 to 800 page books, so they'll keep you busy for a while, or for 3 days if you just sit down and binge read like I do. But yes. All right. Thank you to everyone for joining us. We hope you enjoyed our discussion today. We do release these episodes weekly, but if that's not often enough for you, we are available within the Snowflake Sanctuary Discord server. If you want to offer your own insight, have any ideas for the pod, or just think that we're a cool group of people to chill with, then feel free to click the link in the description. It'll help you sign up and get into our Discord. If you're listening to us on Spotify, check out our YouTube. You get to see what we look like. I think that's kind of cool. If you're on YouTube and you do know what we look like, you can listen to us in the car without crashing your car and watching us. That's pretty cool too. Check us out on Spotify, both by the same name of Sweaty Casuals. Thank you again to Paradox Muse for joining us this evening. Thank you to listening to us, and hope to see you in the next one. Bye, everyone.